when I thought about today, I thought to myself, well, what would be the role of the facilitator? The facilitator's role is meant to keep things flowing along. I said that. The other thing is that it would also be useful if the facilitator could give you a picture of the person who's going to be speaking to you. Now, I know that you have the bio on there, and you might already know some of the people who are here, and so that you'll have a bit of a background. But I wanted to give you something else as I introduced each of the speakers, and I've asked them to tell me something about themselves that will help you connect to them as people, because they come here with information for you, and they also come as a person who's involved in exactly the same thing that's happening for all of us, the change in the climate that's being talked about at the moment. So let us think about the people as you see each of them come to you. They're not just the bearer of information, but they're also a person. And the first of those this morning is Bob Miles. And Bob's well credentialed to be talking to us today because he has 15 years in researching the impact of climate change in agriculture, in tourism, in mining, and in relation to local government. Also, he actually works with the United Nations as an international expert on climate change impacts. Today he's staying with the theme of impacts of climate change as he talks about what climate change means for the pastoral industry, and that's what we're involved in out here. Now you might think to yourself, well, maybe Bob's association with rural pastoral areas is only the last 15 years, but it's not. It's much longer than that. And you might be interested to know that Bob started his early career as the jackaroo on the Kneebine, and later he was the last employee of a Scottish-Australian company that owned Bowen Downs at Aramac, and it was he who handed over the property to the new owner. So Bob comes with a knowledge of this area from very early in his career, and as he talks to you today about what climate change means for the pastoral industry, he can ground it in a knowledge that's more than just the research that he's been doing. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bob Miles.
I'm a bit nervous now, eh? After that long expose of the rules I've got to comply with. But following on from Jerry's introduction, as you can see, I'm almost eligible for pre-chewed food. But what I wanted to talk to you today, ladies and gents, was really to try and give you a bit of a pragmatic approach to what climate change is all about, and to set the scene for the speakers that follow. When I present some of the information to you today, you might sort of think a little bit about the sort of the gloom and doom that's on the screen, but also I want you to think a little bit about some of the windows of opportunity that are going to be created, particularly for the pastoral sector. And they are there, but they're going to require a fair bit of work, and they're going to require a fair bit of change in the political environment, as well as a significant shift in the way we conduct our business. So I'm going to start by talking to you about why it's such a political imperative across the globe. Why is climate change so bigger than Ben-Hur, and the argy-bargy of politics are playing an enormous amount of games with it. I wanted to then cut down to what's happening in Australia and move away from the theory of the models into the future and talk a little bit more practically about what's actually happening. So what are the observed trends and patterns that we're seeing? I'm going to give you a little bit of an insight as to some of the early manifestations of climate change, so how that's being expressed, because climate change isn't 25 years in the future, it's here and now, and it's changing quite rapidly, and I hope to provide you with some evidence of that. And then I'll talk a little bit about the wider issues, not just the pastoral sector, because many of the agricultural impacts will have implications for yourself as well. But we will dwell on some of the specifics of the pastoral sector. And then I want to close by talking about some of the emerging business opportunities. I'll start with a nice little picture of the night lights of the Earth. I'd like you to have a look at that, and in particular note Australia. So there's a huge amount of light activity in the northern hemisphere, but in Australia all you can see are the three little blobs of the major capital cities down the eastern seaboard. We'll bring back that into our discussion in a moment. You're all aware that climate has changed through the eons. We've had ice ages and arid phases and shifts of up to 5 degrees through time. And so nothing's unusual about climate change. It's the rate at which it's changing that is important. The thing that I'd like you to take away from this graph is, first of all, that the globe has a heartbeat, if you like. And it's evident here by this up and down movement, if you like, but highly regulated or self-regulating system of CO2. The red line in the middle is in fact temperature, and if you note there that temperature has followed CO2 and methane on the bottom throughout the eons of time, and that's 400,000 years. You can go back 800,000 years and find a similar sort of curve. So let's have a closer look at that. So a highly regulated, self-regulating system. The metabolism of the globe goes up and down, but now we find ourselves on the extreme right-hand side of this graph where we are well and truly outside the bounds of where we've been in the last 400,000 years. So not only do we have nothing to manage or guide our modelling on, but we're also quite clearly outside the domains of where we've been before. So the upper and lower bound of where we've been in that last 400,000 years is indicated by the dotted line at the top and the dotted line at the bottom. But we're up here in this 350 or the 390 parts per million. And the little insert is just showing you the rapid rate of increase of CO2 in the atmosphere. So we know through history and even our year 10 biology that CO2 and temperature are very highly correlated. So the greenhouse effect. Now this is actual temperature, the Millennium scale perspective, so this is the global temperature. The blue scatter represents the data, proximal data obviously going back 1,000 years. The black line is the actual instrumentation, but you can see where it is now that the temperature is rising rapidly relative to that last 1,000 odd years. Many people talk a little bit about the issue of glaciation and arid phases, if you like. And they have happened, and you can see a scatter diagram there of a bit of a waffly word there, the deuterium temperature anomalies of the past 420,000 years. But again, you can see where the glacial activity has occurred in the arid phases, which are the red bits at the top, and you can see where we are now. So there obviously is a fair degree of anxiety as to what that actually means for us. If we go back to the picture that I showed earlier, which is the night lights of the globe, you can see here a composite picture provided by NASA of what the energy consumption of the globe represented on population density throughout, reflected in this yellow to red light. And note there's virtually nothing there in Australia. Now the important thing here is that if you project population out with technology changes, population growth and technology changes out to 2070, you can see a very substantial increase in the energy consumption in the Northern Hemisphere just based on population growth. The interesting thing there is that Australia only still has a couple of little red dots. So the important statement for you as a pastoral industry and for us as Australia is that we will be a climate taker, not a climate maker. Now, Howard thought ad nauseum about resisting the signing of Kyoto protocols, etc., on the basis that we were going to make no difference. But as a developed country, we've got to show some leadership, and we are one of the highest emitters per capita because of the tyranny of distance of any country in the globe, with the exception of America. So we do need to provide leadership on it, but also realise that whatever we do is not going to change the globe's climate. The IPCC is a group that is represented, a body under the UN that looks at climate change and brings together a gaggle of scientists throughout the globe and their research to try and see what is the policy position that the globe should take in relation to climate change. So they are the preemptive authority on climate change. Some of their work suggests that business as usual. We can see that CO2 levels are going to rise well and truly into that 650 parts per million. And you can see that where we are now in terms of the lowest possible CO2, if we got our act together, and bearing in mind that the last discussions of the G20 in Italy suggested we're going to cap it at 2 degrees, well, most of the scientists laughed at that because there is more than enough CO2 in the atmosphere to take it well and truly up to that and beyond.